Yeah, in order to open things back up, the governor expanded on how he hopes Minnesota will find a way to ramp up its own testing, maybe with the help of a few other states, instead of relying on the federal government.
Governor Tim Walz says he gets updates almost hourly from local medical leaders about what is possible in obtaining his goal of leading the nation in testing and reopening Minnesota. He envisions antibody tests being available at clinics or even drugstores so people can learn whether they've already had coronavirus. He'd like to be able to send tests to a company like Hormel so they can test all their employees, or test an entire county in rural Minnesota to get a grasp of the spread. And he wants to use local manufacturers to fix the shortage in the supply chain, such as with swabs. State leaders say already there's been a lot of local collaboration.
There's just a lot of good collaborative conversation going on with the health systems, several of whom have been trying to develop their own tests. Some of the tests intentionally are trying to use different methods and different types of reagents to avoid competing with the ones that have been problematic globally.
We are pretty optimistic that we can significantly ramp up in the very short run, which will start to give us a lot better picture of where we're at.